The morning sun had barely crested the low hills when she reached the ranch's outer fence, her shadow stretching thin and tired across the dusty ground. Her boots felt heavier with every step, not just from the miles behind her but from the weight of everything she was running from. Days of travel clung to her clothes, the cold from last night still locked in her bones, but she pushed forward because there was nowhere else left to go. The ranch sat quiet and imposing across the valley, a place people mentioned with caution, with raised brows, with whispers of a man who preferred the company of land and livestock over human voices. She paused at the gate, resting a hand on the weathered wood. Beyond it lay rows of grazing fields, rolling open land, and a long dirt road winding toward the main house and barns. She had heard Calder Hayes owned more acres than he ever bothered counting, and that he kept to himself, offering work rarely and firing people quickly. He was a man known for hard lines and hard rules. But she was a woman who no longer had the luxury of choosing kind employers. Her stomach tightened as she stepped through the gate. Each footfall stirred small clouds of dust, rising and falling like her hopes. She had rehearsed what she would say. She needed work. She needed shelter. She needed a chance to rebuild the life that had fallen apart around her with brutal speed. She held the words like a shield, repeating them silently with every step toward the barn. The closer she drew, the louder the steady thumping of hooves became. A horse paced inside, restless and impatient. She paused at the barn door, wiping her trembling hands on the sides of her coat. Her breath escaped in a shaky sigh. She forced herself to stand tall and pushed the door open. Golden light slanted through the gaps in the barn walls, illuminating swirls of dust that danced slowly in the air. The scent of hay, leather, and fresh earth filled her lungs, grounding her for the first time in days. Her eyes adjusted, and then she saw him. Calder Hayes stood in the center aisle, his broad back turned toward her as he tightened the saddle strap on a spirited chestnut mare. His shoulders, set in a posture of rigid certainty, moved with the practiced control of a man who had spent decades working with unpredictable animals and unpredictable weather. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked with old scars and deep tan lines. His presence alone seemed to fill the space. He didn't turn at the sound of the door. She swallowed hard, gathering the courage that had carried her across miles of unforgiving road. She stepped forward and spoke with a voice softer than she intended. Calder turned at last, slow and deliberate, his eyes coming to settle on her with the weight of a man who saw everything at once. He stood still, cloth hanging loosely in his hand, his expression unreadable as he took her in. The exhaustion on her face, the determination in the straight set of her shoulders, the way her hands clasped each other in an attempt to steady themselves. He asked if she was lost. The question was simple, but it scraped against the fragile hope she had carried here. She shook her head and forced strength into her reply, explaining that she was looking for work, any kind of work, and she had been told his ranch might be hiring. Something flickered in his eyes when she spoke, though she couldn't read whether it was annoyance, curiosity, or something colder. He answered her bluntly, telling her there was no paid work. The words hit her harder than she expected, leaving her breath unsteady. But desperation, she reminded herself, was not weakness. She stepped closer, her boots crunching softly on the straw-covered floor. She told him she could clean stalls, mend broken fences, cook simple meals, herd cattle, lift more than most people expected. She told him she wasn't afraid of hard work and that she just needed a chance, one chance, to start again. Her voice cracked on the last word, a small, unwanted fracture in the armor she had built around herself. She hated that it showed, but she didn't look away from him. Calder stared back with a stillness that felt almost unnatural, like a man whose first instinct was caution, not compassion. Moments stretched between them, long enough for the barn to fill with the sounds of snorting horses and shifting hooves. Then his reply came without hesitation, sharp as a blade. He told her the only job on this ranch was wife in his bed. The words hit the air like a shockwave. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move. She didn't flush from embarrassment, she burned with a different heat, startled, angry, and unexpectedly disappointed. She realized almost instantly that he wasn't propositioning her. He was testing her. He was pushing, pressing, prodding to see if she would crumble the way someone desperate enough for survival might. Her pulse hammered, but she straightened her back. She told him she hadn't walked all those miles to be insulted. She told him that if he meant it as a joke, it wasn't remotely funny, and if he didn't mean it as a joke, then he was far worse than the stories suggested. Her voice didn't shake. Her anger, measured and quiet, formed its own kind of strength. Calder blinked, an emotion flickering across his face too quickly to identify. Maybe surprise, maybe respect, maybe just confusion. She didn't wait to decipher it. She stepped past him, moving toward the mare who had been shifting anxiously ever since she entered. The horse's eyes met hers with a restless intelligence. She reached out gently, laying her hand on the side of its face, stroking slowly, speaking with soft murmurs that came naturally to her. The mare calmed under her touch, her muscles easing, breathing slowing. Calder watched, she could feel his gaze on her. He finally spoke again, noting that she handled horses better than many men he had hired in the past. She replied simply, saying that she listened more than she talked. Another quiet settled over them, but this time it didn't feel heavy or hostile. It felt like he was reevaluating her, reconsidering everything he had assumed when she walked in the door. He looked down at his hands, then at the mare, then back at her. He told her the stalls needed mucking and the fences needed scouting. The pay would be low until he saw what she could do. She froze, unsure if she had heard him correctly. When she asked if this meant she was hired, he told her she had earned the chance not because she begged, but because she didn't. The relief that washed through her felt like a river rushing after a long drought. She had a job, a real job, and not from pity, not from pleading, but because she had stood her ground. She took a deep breath and removed her coat, folding it carefully and putting it aside. Her hands found a pitchfork leaning against the wall. She gripped it with certainty, feeling the familiar weight settle against her palms. She had worked in barns before. She had cleaned stalls, shoveled hay, mended gates. Hard work did not frighten her. Hard days did not break her. She found comfort in routine, in the rhythm of labor, in the sense of purpose she had lacked for far too long. Calder moved to the opposite end of the barn, giving instructions in a tone that had softened slightly but still held its usual firmness. She listened carefully, nodding as he explained where tools were kept, which horses needed special care, and which parts of the fence had been damaged by last week's storm. His voice was deep and steady, his words precise, revealing a man who valued order and competence above all else. As she worked, she felt his presence occasionally pass behind her, silent but perceptible. He didn't hover. He didn't question her abilities. He just observed, noting the way she moved, the way she handled tools, the way she approached each task without complaint or hesitation. By midday, sweat had gathered at the back of her neck, her muscles warm from exertion. Her breath came easier now, not weighted by fear or uncertainty. Every shovel of straw, every bucket of fresh water, every repaired hinge felt like a step toward reclaiming the independence she had lost. Outside, the wind shaped ripples across the tall grass. The sky stretched endlessly, a pale blue dome that seemed to promise both challenge and possibility. This land was harsh, but it was honest. Calder, too, she realized, was harsh but honest. And honesty, she had learned the hard way, was far easier to live beside than false kindness. She caught him watching her again from across the barn, his gaze contemplative rather than cold. For a moment, neither looked away. Something unspoken passed between them, not affection, not tension, but recognition. Two people who had been shaped, battered, and reshaped by life's unforgiving hand. She broke the gaze first and returned to her work, not out of discomfort, but because she had a job to do, and because she intended to prove she deserved it. The sun shifted across the sky, casting new shadows across the barn floor. Her sleeves were rolled, her hair pulled back, and her heart, still cautious, felt strangely steadier than it had in months. For the first time in a long while, she felt the faintest stirrings of hope. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. She did not know if this job would last. She did not know if Calder Hayes was a man she would come to trust or avoid. But she knew one thing with complete certainty. She had earned her place here. And she was not going to waste it.